The military investigation lasted exactly 18 hours and concluded what anyone with common sense could have determined in 18 minutes. Sergeant Rodriguez was guilty of being an exemplary soldier who'd had the misfortune of moving next door to Karen Whitfield. But Rodriguez's counterstrike was already in motion. Karen discovered this at 7 a.m. when she found her garden gnomes, all 7 of them, arranged in a perfect military formation on her front lawn, each wearing a tiny hand-sewn army uniform complete with miniature sergeant stripes. A small American flag had been planted next to Gertrude, and a note in precise military script read, "Property recovered during neighborhood security sweep. No theft reported. S. Rodriguez, community liaison." Karen's shriek of rage brought 3 neighbors out of their houses. "She's mocking me." Karen pointed at the gnomes like they were evidence of war crimes. "This is psychological warfare." Mrs. Chen from next door adjusted her glasses. "Karen, they're just gnomes. Rather cute ones, actually." "Hut?" Karen's voice cracked. "She stole them and now she's militarizing my garden decor." That's when Karen noticed the crowd gathering. Not just neighbors, but people with cameras. And was that, yes, that was definitely Channel 7 news van pulling up. Rodriguez emerged from her house in civilian clothes, jeans and an army shirt, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the kind of relaxed smile that suggested she was about to enjoy a show. "Mrs. Whitfield," Rodriguez called across the street, her voice carrying perfectly to the news crew. "I found your gnomes during my morning PT run. They were scattered along Riverside Park Trail, probably fell off someone's truck." A reporter thrust a microphone toward Karen. "Ma'am, is it true you filed false reports with military police claiming your neighbor was conducting espionage activities?" Karen's world tilted sideways. "I never said espionage. I said suspicious. We have recordings of your calls, Mrs. Whitfield. You specifically mentioned intelligence violations and unauthorized surveillance equipment." Karen looked around wildly. The crowd had grown to at least 20 people, all watching her like she was some sort of bizarre street performance. She spotted Bob Martinez from the HOA board, shaking his head sadly. "This is taken out of context." Karen clutched her bathrobe tighter. "She's the one who—" "Ma'am," the reporter continued, "how do you respond to allegations that you've been conducting unauthorized surveillance of military personnel and filing false reports with federal authorities?" Karen's mouth opened and closed silently. "False reports? Federal authorities?" Rodriguez stepped forward, and the crowd parted slightly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Mrs. Whitfield is obviously passionate about community safety. Sometimes that passion gets misdirected." The kindness in Rodriguez's tone was somehow more devastating than any accusation could have been. Karen found herself being portrayed not as a concerned neighbor, but as a confused, possibly unstable woman who needed understanding rather than condemnation. "I'm not confused." Karen finally found her voice. "I know what I saw. I know what's been happening." "What exactly have you seen, Mrs. Whitfield?" Rodriguez asked gently, like a therapist helping a patient work through delusions. Karen looked around at the faces surrounding her, neighbors who'd once respected her authority, reporters who clearly thought she was unhinged, HOA board members who'd already stripped her of her position. For the first time in 23 years, Karen Whitfield was completely, utterly powerless. Karen's voice cracked. "I saw." But what had she actually seen? A neighbor moving in early. Some family members having a barbecue. A porch light left on late. Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. "Community transitions can be stressful for everyone. Maybe we could sit down sometime, work out a way to be better neighbors." The crowd began to disperse, the news crew packing up their equipment. The story was over, not with Karen's vindication, but with her complete and public humiliation. As the street emptied, Karen found herself alone with her militarized garden gnomes, staring across at Rodriguez, who was still standing in her driveway. Rodriguez raised her coffee mug in a small salute, then turned and walked back into the house. Karen stood there for a long moment, then slowly began collecting her gnomes. As she picked up Gertrude, she noticed something that made her freeze. Hidden in the tiny uniform's breast pocket was a folded piece of paper, barely larger than a postage stamp. With trembling fingers, Karen unfolded it. In the same precise military script as before, it read, "Some battles aren't worth fighting, Mrs. Whitfield, but others are just beginning. Choose wisely." Karen looked up at Rodriguez's house, but the windows revealed nothing. She was alone in her perfectly manicured yard, holding a garden gnome dressed like a soldier, reading what felt very much like either an olive branch or a declaration of war. She had no idea which. But for the first time since Rodriguez had moved in, Karen Whitfield was genuinely afraid of what her neighbor might be capable of. The question was, what was Karen herself capable of in return? To be continued. 3 days later, Karen had compiled a dossier on Sergeant Rodriguez that would have impressed the FBI. From her kitchen command center, a converted breakfast nook now featuring 3 cameras, 2 telephoto lenses, and a police scanner, she documented every potential violation with the dedication of a war correspondent. Tuesday, 800 hours. Rodriguez's newspaper remained on the driveway until 8:03, 3 minutes past acceptable retrieval time. Tuesday, 16:47 hours. Suspicious individuals, later identified as family members, gathered in backyard, exceeding the HOA's 4-person outdoor assembly limit. Wednesday, 2100 hours. Porch light remained illuminated past community-established consideration hours. Karen's masterpiece was a 47-page report she'd submitted to the HOA board titled Systematic Disregard for Community Standards. A pattern of behavior. She'd even included photocopied military regulations to demonstrate what she called the irony of a soldier who can't follow simple civilian rules. The response came faster than expected. HOA President Bob Martins called Karen directly, his voice carrying the weary tone of a man who clearly dealt with this before. "Karen, we need to talk. About Rodriguez. Finally, I was beginning to think you people didn't. About you, Karen. We received a complaint." Karen's blood froze. A what? Harassment, invasion of privacy, creating a hostile living environment. The complaint was very detailed, Karen. Very thorough. The line went quiet, except for Karen's sharp breathing. "That woman filed a complaint against me? After everything she's done." "The complaint includes photos of you taking photos, recordings of you yelling across the street, and testimony from 6 neighbors about your surveillance activities." Karen gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. "I am protecting this community. I am upholding the standards that make this place." "Karen, you're removed from the Standards Committee, effective immediately." The words hit her like a physical blow. 23 years. 23 years of sacrifice, of vigilance, of maintaining order while everyone else lived in blissful ignorance of the chaos threatening their property values. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. The board voted unanimously. "I'm sorry, Karen." After Bob hung up, Karen sat in her kitchen for exactly 17 minutes, staring at her surveillance equipment. Then something crystallized in her mind, a clarity so pure it felt almost spiritual. They wanted to play hardball. Fine. Karen picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized from her research. "Fort Campbell Military Police. Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity involving one of your personnel, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. I have reason to believe she's involved in theft and potentially running some sort of illegal operation from her residence." The MP who answered was professional but clearly skeptical. "Ma'am, what kind of suspicious activity?" Karen glanced at her missing garden gnomes, empty spots in her yard. Property theft, unauthorized gatherings, possible intelligence violations. She's been conducting surveillance on civilian neighbors and has access to military equipment that's being used for personal purposes. "These are serious accusations, ma'am. Do you have evidence?" "I have extensive documentation. Photos, timestamps, behavioral patterns. This woman is a threat to community security." Karen spent the next 47 minutes weaving a narrative so detailed, so precisely constructed, that even she began to believe parts of it. By the time she hung up, she'd painted Rodriguez as everything from a rogue operative to a neighborhood criminal mastermind. 2 hours later, Karen watched from her window as a military police vehicle pulled into Rodriguez's driveway. She felt a surge of vindication so powerful it was almost intoxicating. Rodriguez emerged from her house still in uniform, spoke briefly with the MPs. Then all three turned to look directly at Karen's house. Even from 50 yards away, Karen could see Rodriguez pointing at her kitchen window. Karen ducked below the sill, her heart hammering. When she finally dared to peek again, the MPs were gone. But Rodriguez was still standing in her driveway, arms crossed, staring at Karen's house with an expression that made Karen's stomach clench. Rodriguez raised her phone, held it up toward Karen's window, and slowly, deliberately, took a photo. Then she smiled and walked back inside. Karen's triumph cuddled into something cold and uncertain. She'd won this battle, but Rodriguez's smile suggested the war was far from over. Karen Whitfield stood in her pristine kitchen at 6:47 a.m., clutching a ruler and her phone, watching through her bay window as her neighbor dragged a trash can exactly 3 inches past the acceptable curb line. She speed-dialed the HOA hotline before the poor man even reached his front door. "This is Karen Whitfield, 1247 Maple Grove Lane. Violation report for 1249. Unauthorized trash placement extending beyond municipal guidelines." She snapped a photo through her blinds, the flash accidentally going off and illuminating her face like a surveillance spotlight. But today would be different. Today, Karen's perfectly ordered world would collide with forces beyond her control. The first shock came at 7:23 a.m. when she discovered someone had stolen her prized garden gnomes, all 7 of them, including Gertrude, the limited edition ceramic masterpiece she'd special ordered from Vermont. Karen's shriek could be heard 3 houses down. "Thieves, vandals." She stormed around her yard in her bathrobe, clutching her phone like a weapon. "This is a JTDCOMUNIT." The second shock arrived in the form of moving trucks rumbling down her street at exactly 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the HOA's designated moving window. Karen's eye twitched as she watched uniformed movers unload boxes labeled SGT, RODLERIGUEZ, in bold military stenciling. "Military," she muttered, adjusting her reading glasses. "They think rules don't apply to them." She marched across the street, her house slippers slapping against the asphalt with the fury of a woman scorned. The lead mover, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, barely glanced at her approach. Excuse me. Karen waved her HOA handbook like a battle flag. "Moving activities are strictly prohibited before 8:30 a.m. on weekdays. This is clearly stated in Section 4.2b. The mover looked down at her with the patience of someone who'd clearly dealt with worse. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Your job is to follow community standards." Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made nearby dogs prick their ears. "I'm calling this in immediately." The third shock came when Sergeant Maria Rodriguez herself emerged from the house, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes, wearing a perfectly pressed army uniform despite the chaos of moving day. She approached Karen with a diplomatic smile that somehow made Karen feel both acknowledged and completely dismissed. "I'm sorry for the early start, ma'am. Military logistics don't always align with civilian schedules." Rodriguez's voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to diffusing situations. Karen's face flushed crimson. The audacity. This woman was actually talking back to her, as if Karen's concerns were somehow unreasonable, as if 23 years of maintaining neighborhood standards meant nothing. "This isn't about schedules," Karen snapped, jabbing her finger toward the moving truck. "This is about respect for community values, something the military apparently doesn't teach." The moment the words left her mouth, Karen saw something shift in Rodriguez's expression, a slight hardening around the eyes that suggested Karen had just crossed a line she didn't even know existed. Rodriguez nodded slowly, her smile never wavering. "I see. Well, Mrs. Whitfield." Karen Whitfield, HOA Standards Committee Chairwoman. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." As Karen stomped back to her house, she missed the way Rodriguez quietly spoke to her movers, and she definitely missed the slight smile that played at the corner of the surgeon's mouth. The kind of smile that suggested the game had only just begun.